A rope fender key fob. Morning men, starboard 10. The buffer. Yeah, today's another nautical little knot, and so we're going to abuse the buffer. And here we have it. I've got myself a nice little mini fender, mini rope fender on the end of my keys here. And what we're going to do today is learn how to tie this particular fender. There's various different fenders that you can tie. This just happens to be one of them. And to be honest, this can be scaled up or scaled down, and you don't necessarily need to use one colour. Play with this and try different colours and see what happens. You know, you might like the results, you might not, but it's something to play with. And of course, in this video, what I will do is at the end of the video itself, I will put down the measurements for you so that you know how much cordage was used to actually make up this particular fender. So anyway, without further ado, let's get knotting, and I'll see you on the other side. So what I've got in front of me here is I've got 3 strands of, this is a braided cord that I'm using here for this particular exercise, and the only reason I've chosen this one, it's red and just a little bit easier to see than some of the other cordage that I've got. And the next thing that I do is I'm just going to make sure that the ends are sealed. In this particular case, if you're using natural cordage, obviously you'll want to put either some whipping on the end or just a bit of tape or something like that, prevent it unraveling. So now that I've done that, the next thing I want to do is I want to get hold of my 3 cords and make sure they're all level, even in length, which they are approximately, and I'm going to center them. So just center the cordage, and there we go. I've now found the center of my 3 strands. And in other words, what I've done now is I have created 6 strands of cordage laid out in front of me. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put, right, this is now sort of a little bit of a crucial point here. What we're going to do is tie these 3 cords together, and as you can see, the center of my rope or cord is here, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come back a little bit, and then at about this point here, I'm going to tie it off with some string. Just some old scraggly string. And the idea is the first thing that we're going to do in making our fender is we're going to create the top loop of the fender. And so in other words, we're going to do a plait along the top edge here, and we're going to create the loop. So at this point here approximately, I'm going to tie it off with some old rubbishy string, and then I'll do that, and then I'll come back to you in a second for the next part. Right, so as you can see, what I've done is I have now tied it off center at this point here, and all I'm going to do is just take away the loose scraggly ends so that they don't get caught up in the other work that I'm going to do in a second. So just cut those off, and the knot I've actually used here is the constrictor knot, and in all my videos in the description down below there is a link to the constrictor knot itself. If you're going to do a lot of rope work, decorative stuff, learn the constrictor knot, because you'll find it is one of the most useful knots that you will use when doing decorative knot work. So right, now that I've done that, the next thing is let's clear the decks a bit, and what we're going to do now is from this point here, all I'm going to do is plait my rope till we get a loop forming at the top end here, and it's just a nice decorative loop for the start of our fender. So get the cordage, and I'm going to lay it out in front of me, and now that I've laid it out in front of me, I'm going to start and just lay the strands out. Okay, so what we're going to do now is I'm going to do just a standard 3-strand plait. So in other words, when you plait your sister's hair or something like that, you know what to do. And all we're basically going to do is take the outside one. So I'm going to take the left outside one and pass it over the center one. The next thing I do is go to the right hand one and pass that over the center one. and then do the left hand one again and pass it over the centre. So as you can see, right hand over the centre, left hand over the centre, and gradually as we do this you will see we end up with a nice 3-strand plait, and it's always the outside, left outside over the centre, right hand side over the centre, and keep going until you end up with enough to form a nice loop at the top of your Fender. So I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit more, and I'll see you back in a second. So as you can see, I've plaited a couple of inches here, enough so that when I fold it together I end up with a nice loop, nice decorative loop at the top of the Fender that we're actually going to make. And now that I've done that, the next thing that I want to do is I actually want to create that loop. And what I've done here, just on the left hand side here, I have pre-formed a constrictor knot, and what I'm going to do now is form the loop at this point here. Just make sure that the plait that you've created remains in position nicely, and we're looking for enough loop so that we can actually pass our keyring through that. And this constrictor knot, once again, is in the description below. Just pass it over the top of my plait like so, and then once we've done that, pull it all up nice and tight, but just go around and check the dressing on your plait, make sure it's nice and even. And the other thing that you're looking for is that down here it still looks nice and even at this point where you've tied it together, because what you don't want to do is have the strands showing where they're not plaited anymore. So that's what we're looking for here. There's an eye big enough for my keyring to pass through. Now that I've put that in the right position, I'm going to get hold of my constrictor knot and pull it up really, really tight. And the answer is, with regards to this here, we can take this out once we've started to work on our next set of knots. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut these 2 spider's legs out of the way before we start the next part of our Fender. Now that I've bound these 2 together, the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to unpick the first constrictor knot that we did at this point here. So just to unpick that, and then, because we don't need it anymore, it's not holding anything as such, so just unpick it. Yeah, and being a constrictor knot, it's not the easiest one to get undone, and that's why we use the constrictor knot, because it's such a binding knot. It's great, it holds things nice and tightly, and I am just struggling now to get, here we go, there we go, and it's coming undone now. Okay, so that's the next thing to do, is take out your constrictor at that point there. So we should be remaining with the one here that's holding our loop together at the top. Now that I've cut off my bit of seizing that I didn't want anymore, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to determine approximately how large we want our Fender to be. In other words, the body of the Fender, do we want a long one, a short one? The choice is yours at this point. But what I'm going to do is, now that I've got my top done, the next thing I go to is, as you can see, I've got another constrictor knot here. I'm going to pass that over my work, and then I'm going to determine along the length of it here, at what point do I want the body of my Fender to start or end in effect. So in other words, how long do I want my Fender to actually be? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to place it, that looks quite good there, I'm going to place it at that point there, tighten up on the constrictor knot, pull it up really, really nice and tight, and now when I make this Fender, it's going to be, the Fender itself is going to be that length. So not a massive Fender, but not an ultra short Fender either. So now that I've done that, the next thing I'm going to do is go away and cut off these straggly bits, and then I'll come back to you. So there we have it. this now is going to be the core of the actual fender itself. In other words, to give it a little bit of body. And the next thing that I want to do is I want to turn my work on its end like this, and then spread out the chords so that they're evenly spaced around my hand. There we go. And the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to now tie a crown knot into this part here. And to tie the crown knot, all we do is this very simple process is I need to take one lead and pass it over the one next to it there. And you can see now it's passed over this one here. So this one has gone round, passed over that one here, and I'm now pinching it here with my thumb and forefinger. The one that's just been passed over, we then pass it over the one next to that. So take it round and pass it over the one next to that. And that's all we do. We go all the way. That's all crowning is as such. So what we do now is take the next one that's been passed over, and that goes round and passes over the left hand one of that. Then this one here passes over that one there. You don't necessarily need to hold them into place. Once you get used to actually tying or creating the crown knot, it's fairly easy just to let it fold over. And then this one here that's just been passed over passes over the one next to it there. Now, this is the important bit here, because this is the final one, and this final one actually wants to go down, and that was the first loop I created. So the final one, that final one there, wants to pass down through the first loop that we created at this point here. And so there we go. And now if I just let that go a little bit, you can see here now, let's have a look, let's just tidy this up a bit. You can see here now that all the chords are crossing over and are actually locking into each other at the crossing points. And all we do now is we just pull on the cordage, just pull it down gently, keep it gentle and symmetrical, keep pulling down until eventually you pull up tight. And what we're looking for is we're pulling up tight against that bottom seizing. So if we hold this here, you can see here, there's the top end, the Plat that we created. We've seized it there to keep the cordage together at that point. We've then gone down a bit, put some more seizing in there, and then we have now tied our crown knot above that seizing. And all I'm going to do now is just keep going round, and you'll gradually feel it stiffening up as you go round, pulling down on there. And keep going round, pull it up nice and tight, and eventually you'll end up with a nice symmetrical crown knot at the bottom there. And as I do that, I'm just pulling up tighter and tighter, and you can really heave on it. And if you're using paracord, same thing, just keep pulling up tight, nice and tight, until you end up with a nice, and you can see here, it's gradually appearing, we end up with a nice symmetrical crown starting to appear at the bottom end, top or bottom, whichever way you look at it, of our fender, or the makings of the fender. So keep pulling that through, and then just make sure it all stays nice and even, looks good. It's got to look good because you're doing decorative rope work here. And then pull it through like so, and there we go. And now that is fairly tight at the bottom there. Just tease it so that it's all symmetrical, and keep doing that, and eventually you'll end up with a nice tight bottom. You end up with a nice tight bottom. Well, yes, if you want a tight bottom, great way of doing it. But just keep pulling up, teasing it up evenly, symmetrically, and you can see here now we've got quite a nice sort of rose effect appearing at the base of our fender. Okay, so that is the first bit done, and what we've done is we've created a nice shoulder. Now that we've turned it over, what we're going to do is do some more crowning, and what we've done is we've created a nice shoulder for the next series of knots to sit against to actually tie this. So the next thing that we're going to do now is we're going to do the crown knot again. Now, when you look at this, what you want to do is we're going to do exactly the same before, and all I'm going to do now is work my way round and crown. So we're doing continuous crowning all the way up to this point here at the very top. And that, so what I'm going to do now is just take my first strand, and my first strand happens to be this one here, and pass it over the one to the right of that. I then take this one here and pass it over the next one at that point there. So you can see now it's passing over, let's see, where's my pointer? Passing over this one here. We then take the one that's just been passed over and pass it over the one here. Then take this one that's just been passed over and pass it over this one here. And just make sure those don't cross over. So it's passing over this one here. Then this one here now passes over that one there. And you can see here, nice patterns starting to form here. And then this is the final lead here. This final lead here, take the working end of that and pass it down through the loop of our first one there. And you can see now here, just let me hold that in position, pull it up nicely, and you can see here that we've got a nice symmetrical shape going around in that direction. And all I'm going to do now is just gently pull up the cords, just go around, gently pull up the cords, keep pulling like this, keep pulling, keep going round, pulling up, and eventually it's going to lock in against the core of your Fender, or the makings of the Fender. So keep going like that and keep going, and you can gradually see that as I pull these up, it's gradually getting smaller and smaller. So you can see here now that this is getting smaller around here, and all I'm going to do now is just keep pulling up. Pull it up, lock it in place with your fingers, keep pulling up, pull on all the strands, and eventually they will all pull up nice and tight against the core itself. There we go. And as I'm pulling on that, it's now pulling up nice and tight. So I'm going to carry on and pull it up. It takes a few goes round to pull it up and make it nice and snug, but once you've done that, you'll know when it's tight against your core because it's nice and solid. Right, so what I've done is I've now tightened my crown knot up. It's not as tight as I'd like it to be, because the next thing that I want to do is I want to dive in at this point here and get rid of that constrictor knot, because as you can see, you don't necessarily have to get rid of it. What you can do is just poke it back in, but as you can see, it is poking out at two places where I've actually tied my crown knot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dive in there, remove that, and then really tighten up on this crown knot here so that it strangles the actual core, our 6 cores at this point here. Right, so I've now removed my seizing that was at the bottom here, my constrictor knot that was at the bottom here. I've got my crown knot tied above it. Now the thing to remember as well is when you're tying this crown knot, if you want a nice round symmetrical fender, you always go in the same direction. If I were to, so in other words, I'm always going around anti-clockwise when I'm tying my crown knots. But if you want a little bit more of a square fender, experiment with it. Experiment with colours as well. Try different colours when you're making your fender. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to continuous crowning. So what I'll do is I'll show you one more row of continuous crowning, and I'm always going to go in an anti-clockwise direction like so. Right, now that I've got my work laid out in front of me, I'm going to take my first lead, this one, doesn't matter which one's first, and pass it over the one to the right of it. Pass it over the one to the right. Don't allow it to cross the second one because it does get a bit confusing otherwise. Then take my one that's just been passed over and pass it over the one to the right of that. This one here now has just been passed over. Pass that over the one to the right of that. Then take that one there, pass it over that top one, the very top one. Take the very top one, pass that over the final chord. And then this here is my final chord. This one here goes down through the first loop that we created at that point there, down through the first loop, and now we will have our second row of crowning. And all I'm going to do now is exactly the same as before. I'm going to pull up on all the leads until eventually, as I pull up on them, they are going to lock in above the row that we've just created. So it's going to lock in above this first row that we've created here, and nice and snug and tight against the core. And when you're pulling up, just pull up gently to start with. Pull up gently, go around, pull them up, and you'll feel them gradually tightening up as you pull them round. Just keep pulling round, and as you do it, coax it into position to exactly where you want it, and then pull on it and give it some good force, because what you want to do is lock it into position. And you can see here, gradually, as I'm pulling on this, I am putting more and more tension on and going round in a nice circle, just doing it nice and neat and tidy, and eventually, and sometimes change direction, because sometimes you find one way, doing it one way, locks it in position better than the other way. And you can see here now that gradually, at this point here, we're starting to see a nice rope fender, a pattern appearing. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go along and I'm going to continuously crown all the way up until I get to my top seizing there, and then I'll get back to you and show you the next bit to do. So as you can see, I've done a fair bit of the fender now, and what's happening here now is I've crowned, done continuous crowning all the way up, and I'm now getting to the point where I'm about to cover up my seizing here. So what I want to do is I'm either going to do 1 or 2 more rows depending on how much it takes to cover the seizing. And so let's just show you one last time the crowning method. So as you can see, don't forget, this is quite chord hungry. I will put the measurements at the end of the video for you. It is quite chord hungry, and the last thing you want to do is run out of cordage. And you can see here, I don't have much cordage left to play with from what I started with. So anyway, let's do the crowning. And the other thing is, once you've done a few rows, it just makes it a little bit easier to pull it up nice and tight. And what you're looking for is something really nice and firm under your fingers there. As you squeeze that, you get quite a bit of resistance. Right, so final time of showing you. All I'm going to do is take one lead. I'm going to take this one and pass it over the one to the right of it, and just hold that loop there. Then take the next one, pass it over to the right of the one next to it. Take this one, pass it over that one there. Then take that one, pass it over the one next to it. Take this one, pass it over the final one here. And then the final one, which is this one here, will dive down through that first loop. So it's diving down through that first loop just here that we've created. And we can now pull it up, just pull it up nice and gently, and let's see how far we go, whether or not I can cut out my seizing. But it does take a bit of working. Don't expect it all to fall into place instantly. And now we can see here now I can pull it up nice and tight, and I've got something to get a hold of. Pull it up nice and tight, work my way round, getting it all nice and tight. And so the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to continue and tighten this up, and then I think I'll just put one more row in and then take that seizing out at that point there. Right, so I've done my final row here. As you can see, I've taken my scraggy little bit of seizing out of there, and then what I want to do now is just go around and pull this up really nice and tight, because the next thing we're going to do is we're going to lock this all into position, and then we'll be able to cut off our leads accordingly. So the final thing, we've got our fender, we've got a nice dinky little fender here. Now the final thing is, you've got a couple of choices here, maybe more, it's up to your imagination, but one thing you can do is, for example, you can weave the excess chords over one, under one, over one, under one, all the way round, so it goes down in a spiral and comes out at the bottom here. So you do that in each turn, over one, under one, all the way round as you're going down. In other words, it looks like a splice, and eventually you come out at the bottom, and you can then snip your leads at that point there, and you've then just got a little bit more of a decorative effect on the side of your fender. Or if you like this particular method, we need to lock it off at the top end here, and what I normally do is, I'll show you on this one here. So we're taking the first lead here, and what we're going to do is we're going to come over the one to the right hand side of that, and then up through the middle at that point there. So in other words, I've created a little hole here, so the top actual crowning doesn't need to be too tight, so I'm going to go over the one to the right hand side and come straight up through the middle in order to lock that into place. So up through the middle, there we go, and it's coming up at that point there. And you'll see that as we do this, we'll end up with a nice little diamond effect appearing. So I want to now go over this one here to the right hand side of this one and up through the middle. So over, form a hole so it can pass up through the middle, and it doesn't matter if you work loose and slightly, because we can tighten it all up at the very end, and then up through the middle there. And you can see here now we're getting a nice diamond pattern. Let's see, just show that there, a nice diamond pattern appearing there. So the next one we want to do is this lead's coming out at the bottom, go to the right of that, form a little hole with your marlin spike, and then push it up underneath and up through the middle. And just keep going round and doing that. And so I'm going to go around and do that, and I'll come back to you again in a second. So I'm at the final one here now. Here's my final one. It's the only strand left hanging down, and all I'm going to do is we're going to go over the one to the right of that, form a gap in there, and then poke my end through and bring it up through the middle. And you can see now here, all around this edge here, I've got a nice diamond effect, and all I'm going to do now is just pull up on it, pull it up nice and tight so that it locks everything into place. And you'll have to work your way around a few times, bringing all your chords into place so that it all locks up nicely. And then as you do that, you'll see it pulls up nice and tight on there. So that's what I'm going to do now, is I'm going to go around and just tighten that all up nice and neatly. So as you can see, I've gone round and I've tightened it all up, and we've got a nice fender shape down at the bottom here, and then at the very top here we've just got ourselves a small diamond shape at that point there. Right, so the next thing that I'm going to do with this particular one is I'm going to cut off the leads, get rid of all the excess except for a little bit. So I'm going to leave a little bit poking out at the ends here, and I'm going to cut them off. I'm going to basically, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut them off at about that point there, and then I'm going to tuck all the leads in down individually into the actual core of our fender here. And it's a little bit tricky to do. You need the right sort of fairly blunt. This particular one is too sharp for the job. You want yourself a fairly blunt poker to actually and hold the knot at the same time and poke them down. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and cut these all off, so I've got rid of the excess, and then poke them down, and then you'll see what I've done in that respect. Right, so as you can see, there's my other long strands. I've cut one off shorter, I've cut it off shorter. In my particular case, because it's a synthetic cord, I want to just make it so that the ends are sealed. Just gives me something to grip onto with my fid. And then the next thing I'm going to do is fold it over like so, and then I can push most of it through with my thumb and then just put a final prod on it. Anything blunt, just a final prod on it to poke it down into the core of my knot. And that's all I'm going to do here. I'm just going to go around and do that to the rest of my leads that are coming off, and then we will end up with a nice fender. Well, hopefully a nice fender. So anyway, I'm going to go and do that, and I'll see you again in a second. So as you can see, here's the completed fender now. We've got our crowning there, we've got like a nice diamond knot at the end there, and then that's our 3 plats or 3-stranded plat at that point there. And you can see here now, we've made ourselves quite a nice fender. Now the thing is, if you don't feel, I mean, the best way of locking the knots was when I said to you earlier, you can weave it again down here to lock it into place. If you feel, when you first start knotting, sometimes you don't knot things tightly enough and therefore lock it in place. And if you're not 100% confident about your tucking down here and knotting, what you can do is use the finishing solution, and there's a link in the description below with regards to the finishing solution. It has 2 advantages. One is it protects it, and therefore if it gets dirty and manky, it allows you to wash it and bring it back to its original colour. And the second thing is, because it is a glue as such, any knot work that you've done, it will lock it all in place nice and neatly, and it won't come undone either. So, you know, the choices are yours when it comes to actually making this particular fender. So anyway, once again, if you enjoyed it, give me one of these. If you hated it, give me one of these. But please do leave me a comment and show me your work. You know, tell me where I can see it, or in the description below there is a link where you can drag and drop your little works of art to show me. So anyway, once again, thanks for watching. See you again next time. Bye bye.